My name is Ryan Mercer, and I never thought my father would raise his hand against me, especially not in front of my son. But on that grey, drizzling afternoon in Pittsburgh, everything I once believed about family was shattered like glass under a steel boot. It happened in the driveway of my childhood home, the one with the crooked mailbox and the rust-colored shutters. I had pulled up just minutes before, my son Oliver bouncing excitedly in the back seat, unaware of the storm about to explode. He was only 8, all freckles and wonder, and he still believed that Grandpa Hank was the kind of man who fixed broken bikes and bought ice cream on summer Sundays. He didn't know about the pressure my father always pressed against my shoulders like a loaded barbell, expecting me to bend, but never to break. I stepped out of the car, the air thick with wet heat and resentment. My younger brother, Trevor, stood at the edge of the garage, arms folded, that smug smirk on his face like he was born with it. And behind him, emerging from the screen door, was my father. He didn't say a word, just marched forward with that same slow, heavy stride he used when punishing us as kids. "Where's the check?" he barked. His voice was sharper than I remembered. I straightened my back. "I told you on the phone, I'm not covering Trevor's rent again. He's 30, Dad. He needs to learn." My father's jaw clenched. Trevor scoffed and looked away like I was being ridiculous. And that's when I felt Oliver's small hand slide into mine. He had gotten out of the car without me noticing. "It's okay, Dad," he whispered. "We can go." But I didn't move. I couldn't, not yet. My father stepped closer. "You owe this family. You don't say no to your own blood." I stared him down. "I have my own family now. My priority is Oliver, not bailing out a grown man who refuses to stand on his own 2 feet. And then, in one motion that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, my father raised his hand and struck me, open palm full force across the face. The sound echoed against the siding of the house, louder than the thunder rumbling in the distance. I stumbled back, more from shock than pain. Oliver gasped and ran to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You hit me," I said, voice low, more stunned than angry. "In front of your grandson." My father's expression didn't falter. "Maybe now you'll remember where you come from." Trevor chuckled. And that was it. That was the exact moment the years of buried resentment burst into flame. I looked at my son, clutching me like his whole world had just split in two. And I knew this wasn't just about a check. This wasn't even about Trevor. It was about legacy, dignity, breaking the cycle of control that had run through our family like a disease. I didn't retaliate, not with fists. I just stood tall, turned to Oliver, and said, "Let's go home." As I drove away, I saw my father's reflection in the rearview mirror, stone-faced, arms crossed, completely unaware that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't know what was coming, but I did. The silence in the car was heavier than the storm clouds hanging above us. Oliver didn't say a word as we drove, but I could feel his eyes watching me, wide, unsure, searching for the kind of reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he unbuckled slowly and followed me inside, dragging his little backpack behind him like a shadow. I set my keys on the counter, exhaled and crouched down to meet him at eye level. "I'm sorry you saw that," I said gently. He nodded. "Is Grandpa always that mean?" I paused. "He wasn't always, but he's been that way for a long time." Oliver blinked and then did something that nearly undid me. He reached out and touched the red mark still blooming on my cheek. "I don't want to see him again." And just like that, I made a silent vow I'd protect him from all of it, from the lies, the control, the manipulation that had ruled my life for too long. But I knew I couldn't just walk away, because for years my father had taken more than just my dignity. He'd also tied me to him through business, debt and legacy. If I was ever going to be free, I had to dig deeper. I waited until Oliver was asleep before pulling out the old filing box I kept in my closet. Inside were documents, some mine, some from the family construction business I had once helped build. Before I left it all to work independently, I had been the operations lead for Mercer Builders, the company my grandfather started, the one my father now lorded over like a tyrant. That company was supposed to go to Trevor and me equally. But when my mum died, Dad rewrote the will. Suddenly Trevor was the future, and I became the outsider. Still, I stayed close, more for Mom's memory than anything else. But I remembered something, an old document my mother made me keep before she passed. I found it buried in the files. A notarized amendment to the original succession agreement. It clearly named me as a 50% stakeholder in the family's estate and business holdings. The date, 2 weeks before her death. And here's the kicker, Dad never mentioned it again. Instead, he claimed Mom's share was absorbed back into the trust, which he managed. I sat there, heart pounding, as the pieces began to click into place. He had lied. He had used grief, power, and manipulation to strip away everything I had once believed was mine. And now, years later, he had the nerve to slap me like a child, demand more money, and humiliate me in front of my son. Not anymore. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Nolan Grant, my mother's old lawyer. I left a message asking if he remembered Margaret Mercer's final requests. The next morning, I got a call back. "Ryan, I've been waiting for this." That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about rent or even respect. It was about justice and reclaiming what was stolen from me and my son. And I was ready. By the time I stepped into Nolan Grant's office that Thursday afternoon, I was no longer coming as a son seeking peace. I was coming as a man ready for a reckoning. The place hadn't changed. Same walnut shelves lined with legal tomes, same ticking brass clock above the window. Nolan looked older, sure, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't dulled a bit. He stood when I entered and extended a hand with genuine warmth. "Ryan," he said, "your mother was one of the finest people I ever worked with. I was shocked when your father cut you out the way he did." "So you knew," I replied, sitting down. He nodded. "I suspected. After your mother passed, your father requested control of the estate, citing family stability. But Margaret had come to me months earlier. She was worried. She thought your father might try something. So we secured an amendment." I pulled out the copy I found in my filing box and laid it on the table. "Is this it?" Nolan scanned it, then nodded. "That's one of the originals. I kept the other, and it's legally binding." I leaned forward, my jaw clenched. "So he ignored it? Lied to me? Took over everything?" "I can't speak to his motives," Nolan said carefully. "But yes, the estate's transfer, the company shares, all of it should have included you. If you want to pursue this, I'll help." I didn't hesitate. "Do it." For the next hour, we went through the potential case: breach of trust, estate fraud, possible embezzlement. As Nolan explained, we'd need more than just the amendment. We'd need proof of financial misconduct, bank records, ledgers, and evidence of how he'd redistributed assets without legal cause. I knew just where to start looking. That night, I drove back to the house, not to see my father, but to talk to someone else. Trevor. As much as I hated to admit it, My brother knew things. He wasn't smart enough to pull off a scheme, but he had a loose mouth and a bad habit of bragging about things he didn't understand. I pulled into the driveway like a ghost returning to his own grave. The porch light was on, casting shadows across the warped wood planks. Trevor answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, holding a beer. He smirked. "Back to pay up?" "Relax," I said. "Just here to talk." He leaned against the doorframe, but I could see the suspicion in his eyes. "Talk about what?" "The business, the books. You know, Mom's will, Dad's adjustments." That caught his attention. "Why do you care now?" "Because," I said, locking eyes with him, "I found a copy of Mom's amendment, and I'm putting the puzzle back together." Trevor paled for just a second, just long enough to confirm he knew exactly what I was talking about. Then he tried to wave it off. "That's old news, man. Water under the bridge." "No, it's not," I replied calmly. "It's theft, and I think you know where the receipts are buried." He rolled his eyes. "You really think you're gonna take Dad down with some dusty paperwork?" "No," I said, turning to leave. "I'm going to take him down with the truth." And as I walked back to my truck, I could hear Trevor slam the door behind me. I didn't care, because this time I wasn't playing their game. I was rewriting the rules. The next few days passed in a blur of paper, phone calls, and silent late nights at my kitchen table. Nolan had assigned a junior associate to help me comb through the legal documentation while he began filing for a formal injunction on the trust's recent transactions. But the financials, that was the real battlefield. And Trevor, to my surprise, cracked quicker than I expected. Maybe it was the fear in his eyes that night on the porch, or maybe the guilt was finally catching up to him. Either way, 2 days later, I received a brown envelope at my front door. No name, no message, just a stack of black and white printouts, internal ledgers, asset transfers, and a breakdown of estate disbursements over the past 6 years. Half of the transactions weren't even legal. My father had funneled assets from the family trust into private accounts, most under Trevor's name, some to dummy corporations, and a few even back into Mercer Builders as consulting fees. But the worst was this: buried in those records was a withdrawn life insurance policy, originally designated for both sons, altered 1 year after Mom's death, now leaving everything to Trevor alone in the event of my accidental death. That line stopped me cold. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was premeditated betrayal. I called Nolan immediately. He arrived within the hour, eyes wide as he sifted through the evidence. "This is damning, Ryan," he said gravely. "It's not just civil fraud. These accounts, these redirections, this is potentially criminal. So what happens now?" "We build the case, slowly, methodically. We bring it to court, estate court, civil court, even criminal court if needed. But first I want to freeze these assets." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. "And Dad?" "We don't tell him yet," Nolan said. "Not until the orders are filed. We don't want him moving anything else." But I already knew that was wishful thinking, because 2 days later, I received a message through Oliver's school email account, an unauthorized request from my father trying to access my emergency contact info and medical records. He wasn't just trying to steal from me anymore. He was trying to erase me. I felt something shift inside me that day. A line break, a fracture. Whatever hope I had of mending the relationship, of ever being seen as a son, was gone. This wasn't family. It was a chess match. And I had just moved my queen. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called the local paper. Not the big one downtown. the small family-run investigative rag that ran exposés on corrupt landlords and embezzling HOA boards. They still had a columnist named Gloria Reynolds, a woman with a taste for legacy takedowns and a history of going after local elites. When I told her who I was and what I had, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then meet me tomorrow. Bring everything. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. Gloria Reynolds wasn't what I expected. She was sharper, quieter, mid-50s, blazer worn like armor, eyes that had seen decades of secrets and lies buried under small-town smiles. When I walked into the diner on the south side of town with my folder of evidence, she was already seated, pen in hand. "Ryan Mercer," she greeted without standing. "Let's get to the part where your father stops sleeping at night." I slid the documents across the table, copies of the amended will, financial statements, and a thumb drive with scanned ledgers. She barely blinked, flipping through the pages like a surgeon studying X-rays. "Name recognition helps," she said finally. "Mercer Builders, old money, plenty of friends on city council. But corruption? Now that sells. Especially if there's a family angle." "There's more than just corruption," I replied. "There's betrayal, theft, an attempt to rewrite a legacy that never belonged to him." She looked up. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the estate, my mother's amendment, the years of manipulation, the silent dinners, the way my father held money like a leash around my neck. I told her about the night he struck me in front of Oliver, and how that slap didn't just bruise my face, it cracked my silence. She listened, scribbling occasionally, but mostly watching me. "You're not doing this for revenge," she observed after I finished. "No," I said. "I'm doing it for my son, so he never learns the same kind of silence I grew up with." She nodded. "Good. Let's burn the house down the right way." It took less than 5 days. The article hit the front page of the Sunday edition like a thunderclap. "Legacy Lies, the Mercer Empire's Stolen Son," with subheadings that laid bare the forged will, the hidden transfers, and quotes from anonymous legal sources backing the claim. Gloria didn't name me outright, but everyone in the neighborhood knew. Calls started flooding in. Old family friends, my cousin from Ohio, even my high school history teacher. All of them shocked, some angry. A few whispered long-buried suspicions. The story had torn the veil clean off my father's carefully curated image. But the most telling moment came Monday morning when I drove by the Mercer Builders corporate office. The parking lot was half empty. The receptionist looked panicked, and a big red sign hung across the glass doors, "Audit in progress, by order of the state." I didn't even smile, because I knew this was only the beginning. He could lose his business, his reputation, even his freedom. But for me, the true victory would come when he realized the son he tried to control had become the man who exposed him, and did it all without raising his voice. The house I once called home was now surrounded by whispers. Neighbors suddenly stopped waving. The usual lawn crews and catering vans stopped coming by. My father, the once respected figure in town, had become a name people muttered behind closed doors. And yet, despite everything, he hadn't reached out. No calls, no texts, just silence. Until one night, as I was tucking Oliver into bed, I heard a knock at the door. Not loud, not aggressive, just steady. I walked over and opened it. There he stood, Harold Mercer, my father, in a beige overcoat, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His hair was thinner, skin a touch more ashen, like he hadn't slept in days. "Ryan," he said, voice hoarse, "we need to talk." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "I know what you did," he said. "The papers, the audit. You want to destroy me." I didn't flinch. "I don't want to destroy you. I want the truth exposed. I want my mother's wishes honored, and I want you to know what it feels like to be powerless." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You think this makes you a man?" "No," I said calmly. "Standing here protecting my son from a man who once hit me in front of him, that made me a man." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "You were always soft," he muttered. "And you were always scared," I replied. "Scared I'd grow up and stop needing you. Scared I'd surpass you. And now I have." His jaw clenched, and for a second I saw the old Harold flash in his eyes, the man who used control as his shield, dominance as his currency. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't strike me. He just stood there, aging, wilting. "What do you want?" he finally asked. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I want you to sign over the family estate to me. Not as vengeance, as restitution. It was meant to be mine. You stole it, and now I'm taking it back the right way." He didn't answer. "I have everything ready," I continued. "The paperwork's drawn. Sign it, and I won't pursue criminal charges. I'll even ask the paper to stop digging. You'd walk away from burning me to the ground. If you do what's right, yes." He looked like he wanted to fight, wanted to scream, but there was no fire left, no power, just defeat. "I'll need a lawyer," he whispered. "You have 1 week," I said. "After that, I won't stop what's already in motion." He turned without another word and walked away, the echo of his steps fading down the street like a chapter, finally closing. I stood in the cold night air, breathing slowly. For the first time in years, I felt taller. Not because I'd won, because I hadn't become him in the process. 4 days later, a manila envelope arrived at my door. No courier, no return address, just slid quietly into my mailbox like a secret waiting to be buried. Inside, I found the deed transfer papers, signed, notarized. Legal. Harold Mercer had surrendered the family estate. It should have felt like triumph, like justice wrapped in real estate. But as I stood there holding the document in my hand, the weight of it felt heavier than I expected. This wasn't just property. It was a legacy. One he tried to strip from me, and one I now carried, not to preserve him, but to rewrite the name printed at the top of that gate. The first thing I did was drive out to the property. It had been over a year since I'd set foot on the land my grandfather once proudly maintained. The long driveway, still framed with aging pines, was cracked and scattered with leaves. The main house, an old colonial-style estate, looked tired but defiant, as if it had held its breath during the family's implosion. I walked through each room, remembering my childhood. The creaky wooden floors where I used to race toy trucks. The stone fireplace where my mother hung garlands during Christmas. The staircase where Harold once stood towering, yelling at me over grades that were good enough for losers. It was all still here, untouched. But now it was mine. I brought in a contractor the next morning. "I want the inside redone," I told him. "Keep the bones, change the heart." Over the next few weeks, I spent every spare hour working on the property, refinishing floors, replacing broken fixtures, and repainting every wall. But this wasn't about flipping a house. It was personal therapy. Each stroke of the brush, each replaced plank, felt like reclaiming the boy I used to be. Meanwhile, word spread. I hadn't said anything publicly, didn't gloat, didn't post, but people noticed when the Mercer estate title changed hands. A few old friends from high school called. One of them, Brent, who used to do handyman work with me during summer breaks, asked if I was hiring. I brought him on immediately. Others followed. Local, honest, decent men who knew what the Mercers once were and wanted to be part of what they could become again. I didn't rebuild the house alone. I rebuilt it with a crew of good men, each one the opposite of what Harold had ever represented. By the end of that winter, the house stood proud. Not just a monument to survival, but a statement. The Mercer name would live on, but on new terms. My terms, and through it all, Oliver watched. Sometimes quietly, from the front porch with a juice box. Other times helping me hammer nails or pick paint swatches. But what mattered most was the way he looked at me, like I was more than just his dad. I was his example. I was his hero. And for the first time in my life, I felt like one. The estate was finally finished, inside and out. I held a small reopening party, not a gala, not a show. Just a gathering of friends, neighbors, and community members who remembered the old place and wanted to see what it had become. It wasn't about prestige. It was about showing them that something beautiful could grow from what had once been rotten. What none of them knew was that I had one last move to make. In a folder tucked inside my study desk was a printed timeline, dates, records, letters, and receipts. Evidence. A full account of how my father had manipulated finances, forged signatures, lied in legal documents, and covered up abuse for years. He may have signed over the estate, but that didn't erase the damage he'd done. I hadn't decided what to do with it. But the decision came to me when I saw Harold's face on a local TV interview a few days later. He was sitting beside a new lawyer, dressed in a crisp navy suit, smiling at the camera like nothing had ever happened. "This is a personal matter," he said smoothly, when asked about the estate. "My son and I had a disagreement. I made a gesture of goodwill to end it quietly. A gesture of goodwill." He made it sound like he handed me a box of muffins, not like he was caught red-handed and cornered with evidence that could bury him. That was the moment I knew he hadn't changed. He'd only stepped back, waiting to reclaim the spotlight. So I sent the file. Not to the police. Not yet. I sent it to the same reporter who'd once written about the Mercer family's rise to prominence. A woman named Dana, who had since shifted her focus to investigative journalism. I included a note. The truth about Harold Mercer. No embargo, no courtesy calls. Print if it's real enough. 3 days later, the story ran. Former real estate mogul accused of years of financial misconduct by his own son. The article was brutal. It detailed how Harold diverted family trust funds to cover his personal debts, manipulated local contractors, intimidated witnesses, and even siphoned money intended for Oliver's educational savings account. It exposed the man for who he truly was, not a mogul, not a mentor, not a father, but a coward with a nice suit and a cruel streak. The fallout was swift. Harold's remaining business partners cut ties. His name was stripped from a local development board. And those smug interviews, gone, replaced by a press release claiming Harold Mercer has no comment at this time. That was the only statement he gave before disappearing from public view altogether. But I didn't care where he went. He could hide in a cabin or flee to a beach town. He could reinvent himself again. I wasn't chasing him. I wasn't fighting him anymore. I had already won, not through fists, but through truth. And the best part, Oliver knew all of it. I didn't hide the story. I sat him down, explained it in age-appropriate words, told him about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's family. He hugged me afterward, and whispered something I'd never forget. "I'm proud of you, Dad." Those 5 words meant more than the estate, the news story, or any public vindication ever could. 2 weeks after the story broke, I found myself back in the old study of the estate. The room still smelled faintly of wood polish and aged paper, a scent I'd associated with fear for so many years. This time, though, it didn't suffocate me. I sat at the desk with a cup of black coffee, staring at a blank page in my notebook. And I did something I hadn't done in decades. I wrote a letter to my father, not one meant to be mailed, just words that needed to leave my head. "Harold, not Dad, not Father, just Harold. You tried to strip me of everything. My name, my dignity, my future, even my son's respect. But here I am, stronger than you ever imagined. Not because of your example, but in spite of it. You taught me what I never want to become. And for that, I suppose I owe you something. You lost everything you tried to protect through control and deceit. I gained everything I thought I had lost: self-respect, community, a new future for my son, and peace, real, earned peace. You had decades to be a good man. You chose not to. I had one moment to break the cycle, and I did. I won't forgive you, but I don't hate you either, because hating you would mean you still had power over me, and you don't. We're done, Harold. Stay gone. Colton." I folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into the back drawer of the desk. Not to be mailed, just kept, just acknowledged. Later that afternoon, Oliver and I went for a walk along the edge of the woods behind the estate. The spring air was crisp, the kind of clean, hopeful chill that makes you feel like you're walking towards something new. We talked about baseball, about his new school friends, about what he wanted to be when he grew up. A paleontologist this week. Last week it was an astronaut. He stopped suddenly and looked up at me. "Dad," he said, "will this house always be ours?" I knelt beside him. "As long as you want it to be." He nodded, satisfied, then ran ahead, chasing after a squirrel like only a kid with no worries could. I stood there for a second, watching him, a quiet joy bubbling inside me. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home, restored not just in wood and paint, but in spirit. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly broken free. 6 months later, I received a letter. Not from Harold. Not directly. It was from a law firm in New Hampshire, representing what remained of his real estate holdings. Apparently, he had attempted to transfer partial ownership of a small commercial property to a shell company after the public fallout, but his fraudulent paperwork caught up with him. The authorities were investigating again. This time, not for financial misconduct, but for fraud, inheritance manipulation, and perjury. The letter asked if I would be willing to testify. I read it twice, then set it aside. I didn't need to testify. The evidence was already loud enough, but the symbolism, that was satisfying. Harold had burned every bridge, including the legal ones. His actions had finally caught up to him, not because I hunted him down, but because he couldn't stop himself from reaching for what no longer belonged to him. He was a man undone by his own greed. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, the way I wanted. I hired a crew to finish the final part of the estate, a guest house that would become an art studio and workshop for Oliver. He was already sketching like a pro, asking for charcoal and acrylics. Every Saturday, we hosted a community barbecue in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just grilled burgers, music, and good people. People who didn't care about our past but celebrated our present. One evening, as twilight settled and lanterns glowed across the lawn, Oliver came and sat beside me. His cheeks were streaked with ketchup, his hands sticky from s'mores. He leaned his head on my shoulder. "I'm glad we're here, Dad." "Me too, buddy." And in that moment, everything was quiet. No courtroom, no shouting, no fear, just a father and son, finally safe, finally free. That was the ultimate revenge, not Harold's downfall, not the headlines, not the lost fortune. It was this life, quiet, whole, honest, and it was mine. I had broken the cycle, and in doing so, I had rewritten the legacy of my family, not with fists or fury, but with integrity, love, and a will stronger than anything Harold could ever understand.